I don't think any of us had ever cried as hard as we did when we saw you lying there. It was a pain no one's ever expected to feel. We lost our innocence this summer. I miss you so much. I can't believe I'll never see you again. I wish I had said something more the last time I had seen you. Was there a place inside of me that knew it would be the last time I would ever see you again?
I get this text message from Tom's girlfriend saying, "Oh, Riley's dead." I'm like, that's stupid. Why would you even say that? Why would you? That's the... No, no, there's no way.
The police showed up about 2 hours or so after I'd found out, and they were slightly unhappy that somebody else had told me, because, you know, they wanted to be the ones who told me because they knew how to do it whatever the proper way, the way that I wouldn't freak out about it. And as soon as that happened, I wanted to go stay at my friend Brittany's house because that was the house where everybody hung out. You know, everybody was always there. You know, there was video games downstairs and there was parties upstairs, and that's where everybody hung out, and he was there a lot. So all of my memories of Riley were mostly at that house, and I wanted to be there because I felt that that would have helped a lot because, you know, we both knew him so well, and we both knew what the other person, like, exactly was going through. And, you know, it just would have been good to be with her.
Yeah, we had all had like, oh, let's remember Riley at his place. And we had all just basically got together and started talking about fun times, and like, it was kind of hard seeing a lot of his family. I think still to this day they have a lot of issues with talking about him. And so it was kind of, they were kind of gloomy moods, but we all tried to keep happy, and we kind of just had fun. And like, Corian's mom had Riley's mother had ripped all the floors apart because she wanted hardwood floor, and it was still like that. And so she's like, let's write on the floor, and we started writing all what we thought, and like on the stairs and stuff. And I kind of just random, like, you know, little doodads, like, oh, this is Riley's room, pointing this way. And so I don't remember exactly what I wrote, but I just remembered writing, oh, I just love you and I miss you, and like, I'm really sorry I couldn't help or be a part of that, but it was nice. Like, you're definitely one of the greatest moments of my life.
Even in talking to the coroner initially when she was there, she was really concerned about all of Riley's friends and the impact that it was going to have on them. And she had set up, so he died on a Tuesday, July the 17th, and his service was going to be on Saturday, and she wanted to be able to have a session with all of his, or as many as we could get there. So some of his friends put it out on Facebook, and on the Friday we had an afternoon meeting at one of his friends, so the mom hosted it. And in actual fact, Francis Kelsey, where he went, they supplied some school counselors, and he'd also gone to Lakeside. They provided some counselors and some food, and parents and everybody were invited. I don't know how many people were there, but there was a lot of people there. There was probably over 100 people, some teachers and things like that. So the counselor talked about stuff, just talked about that it wasn't anybody's fault, right? That no one was responsible for this. This was an event for Riley, and that we couldn't really know what was in his mind and what really led him to those things. And she provided them with some really good information. And then after that, I don't know whether it was spontaneous or whether she asked them to share, but the kids shared a lot of stuff about Riley and things that he'd done and memories that they'd had of him, and it was quite incredible. And his teachers actually shared as well.
That was really, you know, just a room full of people just bawling and like sharing all these beautiful stories. So that was really helpful and really healing. And then just being able to talk about it, you know, like they weren't skirting around the issue. Like, they told us how he died. They told us that he had attempted before. Like, it was, you know, there wasn't any sugarcoating. It was just raw, and we were all like learning the facts, and and then everyone was just sharing memories. So after learning all that, there was a lot of laughter and fond, you know, it wasn't just all sad. And I think just everyone being there and everyone being so raw together was just like a really powerful experience.
And so after that, Corrine invited us to go see his body, and that was scary. I mean, I didn't know what to expect. I was like prepared for the worst, and it was kind of nice because it gives you a lot of closure to like see his body and be like, hey, how are you? And so there's a few people of his close friends there, and I had owed Riley $20 because I had bought a guitar from him, and so I gave him the $20. And soon following, lots of people put notes of just like, they put a lot of money in there. I guess they owed him it for like doing a lot of stupid stuff that he did, because he'd do anything for a quarter. And so they gave him, like, I think some guy gave him a bunch of pack of smokes. He went to put like one smoke in there. He's like, oh, fuck it, and gave him the whole pack. It was just funny little things that like they just had on them, right? It really had no particular meaning, but they just had on them. And it's like, this is what I can offer you. And it was really nice, and like a few people gave him a kiss on the head and stuff. And it was kind of like, I mean, it didn't really look like Riley. They had hella makeup him. He had a lot of makeup. We kind of laughed because we knew Riley would be like, not makeup. But it was kind of like a really good turning point, I'd say, for like closure and stuff, and feeling a lot better, because even though like it was his body, it was really nice to see him once more.
I didn't really think about anything. I mean, I thought a lot about him and you know why he did it, and you know his reasons for doing it, and you know why couldn't he tell somebody? Why couldn't he, like, why didn't he call me? Why didn't he call me and say that he was going to do it? And you know, and then I thought about, well, what could I have done? What could I have done really? And I think I could have changed it, but who knows? Yeah, I kind of, I didn't think, you know, that it was my fault. I didn't really, I didn't, I never really felt that it was my fault. Kind of just wanted to stay in my room. My room's kind of dark because it's in the basement, and I just wanted to stay in my room. I didn't really want to go out anywhere. I didn't want to do anything. I didn't want to meet new people. I didn't want to talk to people about it. I just wanted to be left alone, and that was very hard to do because I was constantly being attacked by my mother, and she wouldn't leave me alone, and she always wanted to make sure that I was okay. That was my self-help period. That was, you know, I kind of had to think about things and, you know, realize some things, and, you know, realize that I wasn't going crazy.
Like, you were asking about the points of depression and like just being sad, and when you're sad you can feel, but when you're depressed you really have no thought of, I don't know, of just like anything. Like you kind of just wander around in a lifeless body, and that's kind of what I did for a little bit. I was just like at my place going, like doing my culinary arts, just cutting but not giving a crap. I'm just like,
I've always had like a really good meter of myself, and like I can tell when I'm letting myself slip into depression and when I'm just being sad. I definitely, like, I couldn't read for a while. Like I couldn't slip into other worlds. Like I felt like going away from my grief would, like, I couldn't do it, but it also kind of felt like it would almost be like a betrayal. Like I need to like go into some other world, and I just needed to be in that world for a while. And you know, there's things like with my pants, like what happened was I wanted to go down to the beach, but I couldn't just go down to the beach. Like I needed to be doing something for Riley or about Riley. So I like took these pants down there and just sewed and sat at the beach and sewed for a while.
It's, you know, it's like you're really just kind of like a black cloud. You don't want to do anything. You just want to be stuck in a dark room. You know, sleep all day. You don't eat. You know, it's really heavy, and it's very makes you feel really muggy. But you know, grief is kind of like, oh, okay, well, you know, this has happened, and I'm sad about it. And you know, it really sucks, but I'm sad about it. You know, and you know, it's not, you know, world ending. So, you know, I guess I'm just kind of hoping that he's in a better place and that he's happy. And, you know, I tried not to dwell on the fact that I was unhappy. I tried to, you know, think about the fact that he was happy and that, you know, he was hopefully in a better place. And that, you know, even though he had to hurt, you know, a lot of people to get there, that's what he felt like he had to do because, you know, we all got better. We all got happy again. Well, we were all talking about it, so it was a good question. You know, it was a question that needed to be asked. You know, and when counselors or parents or, you know, whoever asked me that question, because it was definitely a question that was thrown around a lot. It was, you know, the question never made me angry. It, you know, never made me, you know, upset that it was being asked or, you know, like, oh, why would you? It always was a question that made sense because it was a question that needed to be asked. And it's a good question.
And so I just, like, later on in that year, I kind of thought maybe I should go to see someone. And so I started going to see someone on the lake here, I forget her name. She was like a different professional. You could tell she was your friend. She wasn't just there to get paid and help you. And so by going with her, it was a big help. And like, I don't know, she's just like, she had a good thing about her. Like most I hear of therapists are like, how do you feel about that? And it was nothing like that. Like, I know Riley went and saw one at one point, and he said it was exactly like that, like a total movie stereotype therapist. And we're like, oh god. That's why I was totally against it at first. But sometimes you get those people who are just perfect and for that job, and she was, and she like became my friend, and I should phone her up later today because I haven't talked to her in a long time. But yeah, she definitely was like the biggest help for sure. Like some random stranger. That's like the best comfort is when you don't know them because you find it easier to talk to them.
I went for counseling, not because I felt like I was forced, but because I felt like I wanted to. Because, you know, I wanted to talk to somebody about it and make sure that it wasn't going crazy. Well, my mom has a friend who used to work for the crisis line, and she has another friend who is a youth counselor. So they both, you know, talked to me about it, and they were both, you know, they didn't pry, but they just, you know, they questioned, and, you know, I talked because I knew them, and I'd known them for a while, and that was good because I knew them and I felt very comfortable with them.
I didn't realize how much it affected a lot of people. Like my friend Brandon, he's kind of at some point he was going through a depression, and I was so shocked to find out that he was in therapy talking about Riley. He met Riley maybe once or twice, and for like 2 weeks he was talking about Riley, and I was so shocked when he told me. I was like, what? Like it affected him, and he didn't even know the guy.
It's definitely made me a lot more aware about people and, you know, taking suicide threats a lot more seriously, and been a lot more sensitive to people who are grieving like that, like inside, and people who have problems like that on the inside. Like it's definitely, yeah, it's made me a lot more aware of people and, you know, their pain.
For like anyone, like police, etc., it's just being there as a friend and like just kind of like just yeah, just being there. Really, it's just like it's just a matter of talking. Like even go out to lunch and like just laugh about things. Like not just be like listen to what you had to say about Riley, and like if it was funny, there's like interesting. Being a friend, like just like being open, like even give examples of your life, of what, oh, this is what I've done, and like just say, because sometimes therapists are usually just there to listen. You don't talk, and I think talking is a really big thing. If you take them out to like coffee, and that's when I find that I open up more. I don't know why, it's just like the classic thing, you know, please coffee and a chat, and so like doing that, and like even like sharing life, like not even about Riley. Like I found when I was with the lady, I was showing her my music. I wasn't even talking about Riley a lot of the time.
Try not to pry. People will tell you as much as they're willing to tell you, and as much as they want to tell you. I think that the worst thing that you can do, for somebody who's dealing with grief is, make them open doors that they're not ready to open yet, because, there's things with grief and with depression and suicide and all those kind of things that, it's like a road, and if, you open doors that, some people never open, if you open doors that people aren't ready to be opened, it kind of screws up the whole, self process of, grief.
One of the things to keep in touch with Riley's friends too is I know that Riley's friends were concerned about me as well, which I thought was quite interesting. Not having experienced that before was their concern for me. I think, I don't know, I think if you can stay connected with those people and just be open with them and let them know how much it hurts you, they'll share with you how much it hurts them.
After, it was about 9 months after he died, my family and Corrine and Tim all went to Disneyland together, and it was just, it was kind of like a trip in memory of Riley. So we all got shirts with like his picture and his name on them, and we wore them all on our first day, and it was just kind of like, Disneyland's always happy, but it was one of those things that was like, we were taking Riley with us, and it was like happy but also tinted with sadness. He couldn't physically be there. And the first ride we went on was Indiana Jones, and afterwards Corrine was just like, she was pretty sad because she was just like, Riley would have loved that ride. So like, I don't know, it was just so important for us to do that, and it was so beautiful. And it was just kind of like, there's a lightness here. Like, I don't feel like it's always going to be sad, but I felt like there was like a big heavy blanket on me, and that's kind of gone. Like, I feel light. And it was just allowing that, because I think some people, when they start to feel better, almost feel like it's like a betrayal, like they don't really care anymore, right? Like they're moving on and whatever. I don't think about that guy. But it was just, I felt like wherever he was at peace with it too, and he wouldn't have wanted me carrying it around like a big heavy blanket all the time.
The only other thing that I would say is that I could not have made it through this without my family, first of all, but without Riley's friends, because they really gave me an opportunity to reach out to them, and they all reached back. You know what, they did, and they think that I helped them, but they helped me. There's just there's no putting that in any other context, right? They saved my life too.
These train tracks are where Josh spent some of his time when he wasn't feeling so well and he'd be at school. He'd just come across here and probably skip classes and just walk along the train tracks. And in his journal, he wrote that he wanted some of his ashes to be scattered here along the tracks, and I didn't feel that his wishes were really respected all that much, and his ashes kind of just kept at our house, and I ended up quite a few years later, I think when I was 16, so maybe 5 years after he died, I took some of them and came here and scattered them myself because I really wanted what he wanted to be respected. In the days after it happened, like I said, there was a lot of people drawing on the sidewalks, and that originally started outside of Sam's house, which is where Josh died. Sam was his best friend. He died outside his house. So that started there, and they had one of those tall tiki torches, like right by the spot that he killed himself. And so after it had started, the drawing on the sidewalks by his place, it also moved to our place, and people would come by and just pick up some chalk and draw. And so I would draw stuff too, and just spend the day like out there and talking to different people. I remember one lady, a friend of my mom's, coming and sitting me down and just having me list all the people that I wanted to know about it. You know, that she was going to call them and tell them. You know, so I list all my friends from school and all these people that like I wanted for them to know about it. I guess also just so that when I went back to school in a month, there would be some kind of awareness, I guess, that I wouldn't be exactly the same and stuff, and that I might be having a hard time. So I think that was it. In that immediate time afterwards, I really needed people of my generation, not necessarily my age, but even just Josh's age, non-adults, to be around me and to grieve with me, just because being with all the grown-ups was really heavy and serious, you know, and I really wanted to just like laugh about him and have good memories about him and hear stories. Josh's friends were around a bit, but I think that they really wanted to be together, you know, like it was like they had their community, I guess, and they really needed to grieve together, and we weren't really part of the same community. Like my family, it was like we had our family and they had their family a little bit, and Josh was sort of more part of their family at that point. So I think that was really hard for my parents, but I felt kind of in between because I could just go and be with his friends, even though I, you know, was a lot younger and wasn't going to school with them and didn't share a lot of the memories and stuff, but they were definitely more receptive to having me than to having, say, my mom go and spend time with them and that kind of thing. So they were really, really good to me, but you know, after a month or so was over and they all went back to school and they had each other there to like lean on and remember, and I didn't really feel like I had the community that I might have wanted or needed. Didn't really feel good about being at home because it was just so unnatural to be the only child. It was like, you know, I have the youngest sibling, so since I was born, I've always had another person to take on the parents with. It's really strange. I didn't know seeing him. He didn't really look peaceful. Like he looked angry, kind of. You know, it's really shocking. I'd never seen like a dead person, and you know, he was covered up to here with the sheet, and he had his eyebrow ring in, and like, it was really, really cold, and obviously, you know, it's like discolored a little bit. I was really adamant that I wanted to go in and see the body with my parents, and I remember my
my mom was for it and my dad was for it, and it was like the person working there that was really like, I don't think this is a good idea. You know, I don't really think an 11-year-old should see a dead body. And my mom was like, no, she really wants to, and I think it's okay, and let her. And so then they did. But yeah, and yeah, so I just remember that experience of kind of people feeling like I needed to be treated as a child and not like included in the process that, you know, we had to go through. Later on, when the coroner was giving his report or whatever, and I was not like allowed in the room, I was like upstairs, and I knew exactly what was going on, and then, you know, and Josh had a journal, and I wasn't allowed to read it, and I knew where it was hid, so I would just go find it when my parents were out, and just that kind of stuff that I felt like I was being protected, but not stupid. So I remember our very, very close family friend who's close to my parents, and her kids were friends that I grew up with. I asked her one day, I said, can I come live with you for a little while? And I can't be at home. It's really hard to be at home, and my parents are crying all the time, and there's just so much sadness and so much like heaviness around that I just want to get out of it for a bit. And she said, yeah, and I'll talk to your parents about it, and she did. And I remember just not wanting to have the conversation with my parents, so it was kind of like they had the conversation, and then I came, and I was sort of like, okay, so did Margot talk to you? Okay, good, so I'm gonna pack my things now. You know, and we never really could sit down and talk about it together. That happened a few times. The first time was within the year that Josh had died. Because I was so aware of how painful it was for my parents, I didn't want to add to that by having them witness me being sad and alone and feeling all these things. You know, so I didn't want to add to their grief, so I think I kind of, in a way, started to become the strong one. I had to, like, I felt like I had to take on that role for some reason, and I didn't feel like it was okay for me to be sad and crying and grieving around them, because that would just make them worry about me and feel sad when they were sad enough. You know. My grade 6 teacher he was really understanding and there for me, but one thing that I was always a very independent child, and I think that was like really emphasized with Josh's death almost. I really didn't want to be cradled, and I think he really got that, this teacher. He wasn't someone who was always like, how are you doing? What's up, Nisha? You know, he really, when I felt like I needed to leave the classroom or something, I really felt comfortable that I could do that. So, like, there were a couple times I seem to remember that I had to leave and go to the bathroom and cry, or, you know, one of my friends would come out with me or something, and that was always just kind of understood. He didn't have to come and talk with me about it after, or he didn't have to come run after me. And so, yeah, I completed grade 6 and 7 at the same elementary school. Then for high school, I really wanted to come here. There was just something that was saying I really want to go to Josh's school, but my parents really were not okay with that, and that was pretty much off the table. Like, I wasn't. And I do understand that they didn't want to have to come here and drop me off, or just have to be here, or, you know, come in for a parent-teacher conference. It would just be too difficult, and I do understand that. But yeah, I don't think they considered enough how important it was for me and how much it meant to me. there was just something about Josh's presence. I really just knew I wanted to come and go to school here. So after grade 10, something changed, and my parents said, okay, if you want next year, you could go to Point Grey. And so yeah, we kind of came to an agreement, and I did come here for my last 2 years of high school, grade 11 and 12. When I was going to school here, just grieving-wise, I didn't really start grieving until age 16. About 5 years after it happened is when I actually started to deal with some of it. I guess there was a comfort to walking down the halls that I knew Josh walked down, and sitting in classrooms that I knew he sat in, and like, I don't know, there was something that where I felt like he was around more. So I liked it, but it made things come up that obviously needed to come up. The counselor here, that was Josh's grade counselor, was a woman named Miss Mickelson, who was just really awesome and understanding, and not like any other counselor I've ever had. And Josh had felt really comfortable with her, and they knew each other. They had a really close relationship, and he would go to her, and she knew he was depressed, and he came to her and confided in her about things, and a lot of his friends also had been really close with her after Josh's death. They had talked to her, and like, they just, yeah, she was really able to connect with the students. She knows me, she knows my family, she knows my brother, she knows all of this stuff. I don't have to explain anything. She was just really there for me, and really allowed me to drop into her office whenever, talk about it whenever. Sometimes I would just sit there and cry, and we wouldn't even talk. I would just come in and be silent for like a long time. You know, she wasn't prying at all. She would never push anything. I went to a number of different therapists, like 3 or 4 different ones. I didn't like being dissected. I didn't like how I had to, like, why couldn't I just feel things and just feel them? Why did I have to tell someone what I was feeling? Know that no matter what age, people know what's right for them, and like, even though I was 11, and even though I'd never gone through anything like this before, I knew what I wanted and what I didn't want, and that really needed to be listened to. Like, yes, send me to 1 therapist, send me to 2 therapists, but when I say I don't want to see someone, I mean it, and that should be heard. I guess that would have been where my parents should have known, because they should have known me well enough to be like, we trust her, we can tell. I guess it was scary because they thought they knew Josh was okay, and he wasn't. I still feel a need to know him, because I guess because of our age difference, there's definitely a feeling that I never really got to the point where we could be friends, because I was still like the bratty, annoying little sister who would tag along and sort of like interrupt him when he was with his friends and that kind of thing, and that's pretty typical. But later on, when you're both young adults, I think that we would have been really good friends, and I think we would have just had a friendship that I guess I feel like I missed out on that, and I'm just, yeah, I feel kind of ripped off. And there's a chronic loneliness that's there. Yeah, I still wish that he was here, and I wish that I could share a lot of things with him. Now that I'm older than he was, it's a bit of a weird feeling, because I'm the younger sister, but now I'm older than him. So I look at it differently than I did when I was, say, 12, 13, 14, because he was still like older, and he was still the wise one, and I guess I felt like, well, he knew what he was doing, and I didn't see it as a mistake really, and now I do, because now I feel like, you're 15, like you didn't know anything, you're so young, and like, you just, like, it could have gotten better and you couldn't see it. So yeah, now I see it more as like just a really sad mistake and a really, just like just a shame.
Okay. This is a letter that Janice left for me. Chelsea, oh how sorry I am to be writing this. It was all so easy. I had planned it so perfectly until I met you. And now I find myself torn between two opposing forces, to stay and be with you, or to let go and be free of this unbearable pain. I'm so in love with you. I've wept again and again at the thought of leaving you. Before I met you, I was ready to go. It was easy for me to be selfish and feel little remorse, but then you came and snatched me up so suddenly that I could scarcely believe my own heart. You love me unconditionally. Never before have I felt such a thing, and honestly, it terrified me. Effortlessly, you passed by the walls I'd spent so long erecting, and before I knew it, I could feel again. You've brought me this profound joy, and it sweeps over me every time I look at you. To my dismay, I now find myself unable to escape a strong feeling of sorrow and remorse. I catch myself cherishing the small moments I have with my family, all because of you. I find in you everything I wanted and more, yet am I so stubborn as to remain steadfast in my dance with death? Part of me hopes so dearly to survive, but the other part is riddled with the stark addiction. I want to grow old with you and have children. Some days I can think of nothing other than suicide. Others, all I want to do is hug, kiss, and lie with you forever. Oh, Chelsea. I feel shame and guilt for what I've done. I hope that you will find it in your heart to forgive me. I wrote the poem My Wives in hopes of explaining the duality between my love for you and my love for suicide. There is no real way for me to shed light on my realizations. Some days I just feel so ill, so weak, and detached, always detached. My thoughts turn backwards and I find myself in a place so dark that even the light of your love can't break through. But maybe I've just got my eyes shut in my fear. Chelsea, I'm so sorry. I love you more than I've ever loved anything or anyone. Thank you for loving me. I'll see you again someday. I love you, Janice Meganley. Alright, my name is Chelsea, and I lost my dad when I was 16 years old. He committed suicide, and I lost my girlfriend Janice when I was 17 years old, and I'm currently 20. With Janice, I was the one that found her after she committed suicide, so I didn't know that she was going to commit suicide. She didn't give me any indications. You know, like, she was the person that had a steady job, went to school, was really confident. When I introduced her to my other friends, she could hold a conversation, make them laugh. Like, she was really together, I felt. when I actually came home and came to her house and found her, I was really at first in shock. I remember standing there and looking longer and longer, and little things were hitting me more and more. At first it just nothing was hitting me. It was just oh, she looks cold. It was not my brain didn't want to accept it, because I was standing there and it's I was in this room, and I don't know, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to call or anything, and it's I knew I should be calling 911, but I didn't know how to say that or how to start it. And so after that I got kind of more in panic mode, I need to do something, and that's when I called 911. And that conversation was really hard. Eventually they buzzed and I had to go downstairs, but it was really hard for me to leave the room because I felt all these people were gonna come in and and it was just everything had changed, and it was really scary to let all these random strangers just walking up there, and I didn't know if that was the last time I was gonna see her again as well. I didn't have a chance to say goodbye because I was so panicked and so scared, and when I dealt with the police, they were just kind of asking me questions, trying to be very direct, and just, they were saying I'm sorry, but it's not they, could do anything. They're not trying to see if I'm alright. They're just asking me direct questions. And when the lady from Victim Services came, I started to kind of talk with her, and when she asked me who was Janice, was that your friend, I said that it was my girlfriend, and I just felt that she didn't like that very much. She just maybe was uncomfortable with it a little bit. I could see from her body language, she stopped kind of talking to me a little bit and was more oh, it's your friend, just didn't acknowledge what I had said. And that was really painful for me right then. After that, they called on occasion and said are you alright, and kind of talked with me, and that was nice that they did that, and they did follow up. That was the only place that does follow up, right, is that they keep calling you and trying to help you out. But for me, just kind of getting random phone calls, it I could be at work or it could be at school, and they'd kind of say, well, how are you doing, with Janice, and it would just kind of make me upset at that point. So I just said, I'm sorry, I'm fine, I don't need you guys to call anymore, because it was just kind of triggering me at random times, and I couldn't focus then on what I was doing. I had only met them really briefly, they were acquaintances. I'd said hello. I couldn't even tell you their name. When I found Janice, I couldn't tell the police what their names were. I just said look in her phone under mom and dad, because it's gonna be in there. But that, and also she had told me they're not okay with her being gay. So, and that was part of the reason why she moved out when she was 18. I wasn't sure if I was allowed to go to the funeral, or if I was going to be allowed to have the letter or the poem that she had written for me. When my dad passed away, it was really important for me to go to his viewing. That was the first thing I thought when they told me that he had passed away, was that I really wanted to go and say goodbye to him. And my grandparents really thought against it, they really didn't want me to go, but after going, I felt I needed to go. So with Janice, it was I didn't even want to ask. Margaret was the one that offered to let me come, and after going, it made me feel a lot better. It was nice because I could go and say goodbye, and I saw her looking peaceful, and Margaret was really generous. She asked me to choose what Janice was wearing at her viewing and stuff, so that was really huge. When Janice passed away, my grandparents told me that my dad had also committed suicide. For that year after his death, I had thought that he had had a heart attack, and my grandparents decided after she had died that it was the right time to kind of tell me that he had also done that. So that was really hard, I felt I got hit twice. All of a sudden I felt okay, everyone in my life is going to commit suicide, everyone is going to go.
I felt really overwhelmed with that. Like, felt like I'm doing something wrong. I can't, you know, I felt really alone with that. Everyone in my family was scared to talk about death. They didn't want to talk about it. They didn't want to tell me that he committed suicide. Yeah, they definitely didn't want to ask me if I was suicidal. It was kind of like, you know, and even now, like when I talk about him, they'll talk about him, but I can see that it's hard for them. I think they just felt really guilty, really guilty, and they were the ones that found him, so I think that probably had a lot to do with it as well, like why they were scared to tell me. Probably because it frightened them, I'm sure. Also, like, I felt, after a while, I felt like I just felt angry with my grandparents that they didn't tell me. I felt like they were trying to make a big secret and cover it up, and like they didn't take his decision seriously. They couldn't deal with that, because you know, that was his decision, and when someone makes that decision, they're not quiet about it. Like, they're not, like, I don't mean like as in speaking about it, but they're ready for anyone to find them. He doesn't know if I was going to be the one to find him. Like, it doesn't matter to that person, and so I think it, like, you know, by not talking about it, it makes it a big deal, but whereas if they had told me about it, I could have dealt with it at that time. And also I look back on it, just thinking about Janice, like, I could have told her that I had experienced a suicide in my life. I didn't know at the time that I had lost someone already to suicide, and when it came to my dad's 1 year, she was laying right beside me, you know, and she didn't realize that I was crying because my dad had committed suicide. But, you know, at the time I thought that he had just had a heart attack, like some kind of drug implication. Like, I didn't understand that that was what it was about. And I think back, like, you know, I hate to do the what ifs, but it's always like, you know, what if she had understood that? What if she had seen somebody that had gone through that? What if she could have talked to me about that and actually felt comfortable to speak with me? It could have changed something, you know? Maybe it wouldn't have changed something. I don't think at the time I understood that about grief. Like, I knew that I was sad because of their deaths, but I thought like when I was not going to school and that kind of stuff, I thought I was depressed. I didn't understand that I was just dealing with grief, and that, you know, like I didn't want to go and talk to a counselor or anything like that, but I didn't feel like I was okay, you know what I mean? Like, I felt really consumed by it, like almost, you know, like almost, and after like losing Janice and stuff, I felt almost obsessed with it because I couldn't stop thinking about it. Like, I couldn't stop trying to fit puzzle pieces together and see little ways that I missed clues, and I couldn't like stop thinking about it. I couldn't stop like trying to, I don't know, just do everything in regards to her. And I don't think I understood that I was just going through a grieving process. Thought that I was really depressed, and like when I did have like kind of suicidal thoughts, it was like more so that it wasn't that I was like, oh, I want to die, I'm so sad. Like, it was that I felt like, oh well, maybe, you know, if I were to die, then I can see my dad, maybe I can see Janice, maybe I can, you know what I mean, I don't have to feel this way, kind of thing. So I thought that that was depression as well, but I mean, I look back on that now and I see that it was me grieving over, I want to see them, like, you just want to see them type thing. When you lose someone to suicide, that's all you can think about, whether or not it's if you're thinking about yourself committing suicide or whatever. Like, it's just really consumes you a lot. Like, it's such a violent way to die that it's really sad for people. It's really hard to take. Like, even now when I'm thinking back about my dad's suicide especially, like, it's just such a violent way to like end your life, and painful, and it's so hard. Like, it makes you feel, it just makes you feel really bad, and it makes you feel really depressed that they were alone and that they couldn't confide in you, that they didn't feel like it was worth it. They were too much of a burden for you. Like, it makes you feel a lot of guilt in that sense. So I can definitely see how people who have been touched by suicide or get suicidal or depressed. When it happened, my mom called the school and just said, I think she just spoke with the principal in general, and just told him why I wasn't there. They said, like, take as much time as you want. The thing that I found hard was that they didn't tell the teachers, like my individual teachers, like what had happened. So when I actually went back, you know, like I think that they told them I wouldn't be there for a while, but when I went back I had to explain that to a lot of the teachers. And really I only had like a good connection with one of the teachers. One of them really understood like what was going on. He just made me feel a lot better about it. Like he made me feel like he understood what I was saying. And also like with him, he said to me like, you know, you should come, it's important to get it done, but you know, if you don't, you can go back and do it. Like your education is important, you should, you know, you want to get it done. Like he made me feel like just because I didn't finish it within that timeline, it didn't mean that I wasn't capable of finishing it or that I was some failure. He tried to be accommodating to me at the time. But a lot of the teachers just didn't. They just kind of were concerned, like, you're not going to graduate, you know, you're missing school, you're missing all these assignments, you're just not going to do it. Impact-wise, I mean, obviously I didn't graduate. At the time I couldn't go to school, so now I'm going back and taking courses. I felt like I needed to move. I had to get away from the town at the time, so I moved away to the Yukon. It just impacts everything I do. I talk about it, like I got a tattoo for Janice, and like with her clothes and all of her belongings, like they didn't want a lot of it, and at that time I was 17 and I was so attached to, it was my girlfriend, and when they kind of said, okay, well, do you want this? We don't want it. Do you want that? Do you want the other thing? I kind of just said, okay, sure, like everything. Which for the last few years I've kind of like lugged it around like baggage, you know, like just like all this stuff that has no meaning, but it's just like it was so important to me because it was hers and I couldn't throw it away. It wasn't until like this year that I've even become productive with those kind of belongings, like deciding to donate items, and my friend Laura suggested making a quilt with her clothes, which I'm really, really excited about because it's like I have all these clothes and I could never wear them and I can't really bear to part with some of them. But I can't really keep them in boxes in my closet because that makes me sad as well. I think a lot of people are scared by suicide and just sadness in general. I think that everyone is scared of it, and sometimes like I said, like people don't want to talk about it, they don't want to bring it up. They think like if they ask you about it, then you're gonna commit suicide the next day, or you know what I mean, like it's gonna make you think about it, like as if you haven't thought about it or something. I think that people also don't prepare for those things before they happen. Like I didn't know anything about suicide before losing people that way. I didn't understand anything about depression. I didn't look into those things myself, and I know like my family definitely didn't know anything on that part. And like school-wise, I think that like teachers can really have a huge part, like because they do deal with children, whether or not that's like the subject or they're doing they're helping them with like personal things or personal planning or whatever. Like I think that they all kind of have the opportunity to really like learn about problems that the kids go through and help them out. Like I think that there's room for someone to go above and beyond, or you know what I mean, to really want to make a difference.
My name's Jennifer White, and I'm currently an assistant professor here at the School of Child and Youth Care at the University of Victoria. And prior to coming here, I'd spent much of my professional career, over 20 years actually, working in the area of youth suicide prevention with a real interest and focus on promoting well-being and mental health promotion with young people and involving young people in any kind of community-wide effort to prevent suicide. So it's always been a real interest of mine, and I've stayed connected to that issue here at the university with my own research program as well. My overall impression of the three stories was that I was very struck by the wisdom of these young people right off the bat, that there's a deep wisdom that they have and that they convey in their words. I was also very struck by the theme that kind of ran throughout each of them about they want to be taken seriously, they want to be treated with respect and dignity, and they want to be given the honest account. They don't want things to be sugar-coated, they don't want to be protected. And I was struck by the well-intentioned adults that think we're doing some service to young people by shielding them from painful things. And so I think in the ways that each of them spoke of that I think that came up in every case, that just give me the goods, treat me like a mature person who's capable. I really liked that. And I think it fills such an important gap, because I think we've got quite a bit of literature now about some of the things that communities ought to think about when they're responding to a sudden suicide death in the community, and those are really important resources. But what we don't have is the perspective of young people themselves, the people who've actually lived through the experience of losing a loved one to suicide. And so I was very drawn to this project because I think their stories and their experiences and their recollections of how they felt at the time and now how they feel many years later are so important for future practitioners who might be students now but going to go out and work with young people, or current practitioners too. Well, Chelsea's right off, and I'm sure for most viewers, one of the things one takes away from seeing her story is how important it was for people to get the nature of her relationship with her girlfriend right. So getting that right makes a big difference. So calling her a friend is not the same as a girlfriend, and I think that was a really important point. That we need to honor the relationships that young people have, and that we need to use the right words to convey the depth and significance, because not only does that convey the depth and significance of the relationship, but the depth of the loss and the level of pain that must have led her to feel. The other thing that I was struck by Chelsea's story was this whole notion of no matter how people want to be helpful and are trying to be helpful in their own way, every young person is going to have a very different experience of what's going to be required for them. And I think through her story and some of her examples about the well-intentioned volunteers calling randomly to check in with her, I mean, we can see how that could be set up as a policy and a good idea to keep connected. And she herself said, you know, that's better than nothing. But at the same time, it was experienced as a bit of an intrusion and disruptive and not particularly helpful. So it was a great moment to say, wow, we have to really think through these things, not just have standardized policies that are the same for everyone. And I think that that's a big message of this particular project, is that there's no one way, there's no one template, there's no universal strategy that we can pre-specify in advance that will work for all young people. And I think Chelsea's story helped me to appreciate that. I think I've come across lots of situations where adults think they're doing the right thing by not telling a young person the truth, particularly about a parent who's died, and they conceal it or they give a different account. They say it wasn't a suicide, they say it was an accident. So on the one hand, I completely understand the intention because it's born out of a desire to protect and out of love. But I think it's a misplaced strategy. And I think that time and time again, young people say, we want to be spoken to with respect. And what that means is you need to be honest with us. And so I think that we see through her story how much that made a difference when she knew the truth, and that allowed her to think about her dad in a different way, that allowed her to think very deeply about the meaning of that suicide, which is what's required to heal, is to make meaning of death in our own way, on our own time, and on our own terms. And so being a suicide death is quite different from a heart attack, and so she needed to have the truth about that to really heal. Well, Nisha's story was interesting in its own right as well, and one of the things that occurred to me about her story is that there was the greatest distance between the death and the time you interviewed her. And so what we saw through her story is how much change took place over that time. So she lost her brother at age 11, and I think you interview her and she's around 21, so there's a 10-year gap. So there's a lot that happens in that 10 years. And so I think there's a very hopeful message in that too, is that it's always in process and the meaning is always emerging. So there's no one final meaning that someone gets to and says, okay, I've got that wrapped up and now I'll move. There's constant re-engagement with it on different levels. And I think that when she spoke about the fact that she never really thought of herself as an only child, and now she has to grapple with this notion of I'm an only child. So it changes the family constellation, it changes the family structure. Now she's older than her brother was at the time of his death, and what does that mean? He's no longer sort of this older brother. And so I think we see in her story all of these complex relationships that have to be renegotiated at one level, and also how they change one's identity. You know, to be a younger sister is very different from being an only child. And to have a relationship with a brother who you think all along knows what he's doing, to then come to this other conclusion, which I think she clearly said was, I think he made a mistake. And she thinks at 15, he couldn't have known what he needed to know to have made that kind of drastic, you know, life-ending decision. So we see lots of wisdom in Nisha, and I think the other thing I was very touched by is how she said at age 11, again, that idea that parents were protecting and out of good intention. I know that they were trying to do that, but she said, I knew it all. I knew everything that was going on. And so I think we have to give credit to children and not underestimate what they do know, and give them the information clearly and in a straightforward way. But there's no room for misunderstanding, because sometimes the things that they might make up might be worse than the actual truth. Well, there was so much there in terms of the process that took place after Riley's death. That seemed to be very thoughtful, very helpful, and very much conducive to healing. And in many ways, what I was struck by was the way that that just spontaneously happened, but that it had a lot of leadership. And obviously the coroner played an instrumental role in bringing those young people together when it was summertime, and it seems like she knew there wasn't a school structure in place. And so that was a really great intervention, I think. And clearly Corinne played a pivotal role in being able to bring the friends of her son together, and she was open to that and found it helpful. Not only did she think it was helpful for them, but she also admitted that it was reciprocally helpful for her healing. So we saw that in her story particularly. But I think what's interesting about Riley and his friends and the circle around him is that they all had a different experience too. And so again, it speaks to this issue of, even though it's the same person being grieved, every person has a different relationship with them. Some people might have things that were left unsaid. Some might have things they wish they could have said. Some might have guilt. Some might have just deep loss and loneliness. And so every person's going to have a different experience, and we have to make room and space for that to be heard. And even some might seem they're not emotional enough, or it doesn't look like they're really grieving, or all kinds of judgments we could come to if we were using some standard template of what the grief checklist ought to look like. And so I think their story collectively and individually helped to disabuse us of that notion that there's one singular way to grieve, and really showed the complexity of it. And I think it also showed the humor that can exist. It's okay to laugh, and it's okay to have a laugh in a sense of getting closer to the person who died. I think the whole issue of what are the cultural norms around grieving, and lots of young people, this might be their first encounter with death. They wouldn't have even had any family members die before, so there's an awkwardness sometimes. Sometimes there's anxiety. And so I think in the stories of Riley's friends, where they were putting things in his casket, money that had been owed, and I think cigarettes, and not just one, but a whole pack, I think in some people's minds they might think that's disrespectful, or that's not honoring the dead. But I think in this particular case it looked like there was an openness to recognizing these gestures as efforts at connection, which is how I interpreted their stories, and an honoring of their relationship in a way that they made special for themselves. So they don't seem like sacred objects, but I think that they could be understood as connections to their friend. And even the going to Disneyland with photos of him on their t-shirt, they really clearly said, we brought Riley to Disneyland. And so there was lots of good examples of the ways that they used imagination and creativity to stay connected to Riley in a way that did honor him, that I think avoids what some people are concerned about, which is to glorify the person who's died by suicide. And I think we have to take that seriously, that is a concern in a school context or a small community. We don't want to do anything that draws attention to suicide as a good way out, or a natural advertisement as a way out of stress. But I think in those occasions they were very private, special ways that they honored their friend, that I don't think would serve as an invitation or create conditions for contagion, which is often a concern in postvention efforts. Well, I was delighted that so many of them had something to say about the stereotypic counselor with the stereotypic, how are you feeling? That they just loathed that idea and didn't want to be intervened with or on by someone who kind of came right out of a Hollywood movie. And I think that's a strong message to those of us in the helping profession, myself included, that young people don't want to be treated in a way that feels artificial or phony, or they use the language of prying. You know, I think two of them, independent of one another, talked about they didn't want people prying. And yet in Pete's case, he spoke, I thought, very eloquently about the kinds of characteristics that made for a great helper. And it was someone who would speak about music with him. And he said, there we were talking about music, and yet so many of the ways of going forward and healing and connecting take different turns for different people. And it doesn't mean just sitting there and unearthing all of these feelings of upset. It might look different for other people. And so I thought he gave a great example. And this particular person obviously made a big difference and a big impact. And he said that he credited her with being the biggest help. And it's like was much less formal than we might hear of in a traditional kind of therapeutic relationship. And even he had feelings of friendliness and wanted to catch her up on some of the news of things that had happened to him since. So I thought that was a great example of the things that do make a difference. And so I think it is a very delicate balance, and I don't think there is a right answer, because sometimes young people who say they don't want to get help, it's just that they haven't found the right person. So sometimes it does require checking out and being open to maybe another kind of helper. So I think it's a constant negotiation, and there's no one right way to say, well, you must force the issue and force someone to go to counseling, or you stop at the first time that they say no. And so it's this kind of checking in, coming around to it again, trying alternatives. And I think also for helpers, professional helpers, serving professionals, is to not feel bad if they're not the go-to person when there has been a suicide death in a community, even though they might have the role or they're the designated helper. Young people have a way of seeking out those people that they feel the safest with, and sometimes it will be a teacher. And I think there were other examples in the stories that people told. I think Chelsea talked about a teacher who really got it and didn't have to say a lot, but there was a sense that this teacher understood and allowed her to kind of come and go as she needed to from the class without making a big deal. And again, I guess the message comes back to there is no one right way. There's no one script to give to people and say, here's the words you say. But what's most important is that people engage with young people on an individual basis, have a sense of who they are, what that relationship meant to them, make no assumptions, and check in about our own biases, whether they're cultural biases or heterosexist biases or other kinds of ways that might get in our way of connecting with young people about who they are and where they're from. And that requires us to listen, and that requires us to ask, and that requires us to, I think, be humble. Well, I think this DVD will offer a great learning tool across a number of levels. So for myself as an educator of child and youth care practitioners, for example, I could imagine using it both in our undergrad and graduate programs to just give people a sense of the impact of a suicide death. And not to say that this is how everybody will feel, but it's a first-hand account, recent account of what people actually went through, and because it's got some distance to it, so it's not interviewing these people the day after, it's got that benefit of some hindsight of people were able to talk about the things that helped and the things that didn't help. And what I like about it is that those voices stand on their own. They are unmediated voices insofar as they speak their experience, and that we can take as viewers a lot of important messages from that. So we hear about the importance of attending to the relationship and the significance of it, and using language that reflects that understanding. So I could imagine using it in a classroom, showing a little clip, getting people to have a conversation in small groups about the kinds of things that they're taking up from it, because we each as viewers respond to it in different ways. And so I'm just responding as one viewer, but there'll be multiple perspectives, and I think that that's what we want to generate, is the idea that there are multiple responses, and it's a chance to get in touch with our own judgments about grief and how grief happens and how it's supposed to happen, our own judgments about what's normal and what's not normal. It invites a good discussion about attitudes about suicide, which is often very emotionally charged. Sometimes people have lots of fear and anxiety, and also judgment about it. So it would be a great platform for any of those kinds of discussion, which I think come down to values, comes down to checking in with ourselves about our own history, what does that trigger in us based on our own past, but also provides a platform for us to go beyond that, to start saying, okay, well, if you're the practitioner and this is the young person that's coming to see you to get some help, where will you begin? Where will that take you if you go down there? And what might happen if you went down this road? And so it's just a great platform because it's so open. And that's what I appreciate about it perhaps the most, is that it's not saying here's the way or here's the one right way, but there's multiple entry points to talk about this. They've given us a wonderful, rich account of their own experiences. And I think it could be really useful both for students, but also for practitioners who are already working in the field. And in some ways, and sometimes this is hard learning, for mental health practitioners to learn that maybe some of their strategies that they're using aren't so helpful. And I know for myself, those are always sometimes hard-won learnings to hear, like, oh, you mean, calling up and checking in with you wasn't helpful, that wasn't my intention. But I think that that's the kind of feedback we need both as individual practitioners and as a system as a whole. Is like, what are we doing and what kinds of assumptions are we making about what other people need? And I just think it's a great invitation for us to consider that there's multiple ways that people respond, and that means that there's multiple ways that we can be helpful.
Make peace with the horrors and laugh once again. Fill up these holes and feel joy once again. Smile and mean it and feel whole once again. When you're left to you touched our hearts in a way you can't explain. Our brothers.